Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Pan Future Society podcast. I am your host, Sean, and today is Saturday, October 21st, 2017. This week, we continue the alternating cycle of shows, and it will be an all-news show, a bunch of quick hits about some futurism, science news, things coming right around the corner from you, and farther into the future. Speaking of the future, there must be something about the regular school year getting started here in the United States again, because a whole lot of people I requested interviews of have said yes, and I've got a ton of interviews coming up. In addition to the most recent ones with Steve Kilston and Mike Paul Hughes. I hope you've heard those in the past few episodes. I also have interviews coming up covering everything from blockchain and Bitcoin, nanotechnology, and I have a great interview coming up next week with astronaut Abby, who may indeed become the first astronaut on Mars if all goes to plan. So stay tuned for all these great interviews. I hope you enjoy the interviews. I like doing them because I get to talk to people who are smarter than me, at least about certain topics, such as the ones I've talked about, and it's great to learn from people, and you don't have to sit and listen to me the whole time either. So another bonus there. All right, enough jibber jabber. Let's get on with the news. First item on the news docket this week: autonomous cars without human drivers will be allowed on California roads starting next year. This article letting us know that 42 companies are currently testing 285 self-driving cars in California. That is a lot of data being collected. And the California Department of Motor Vehicles will allow these cars without steering wheels, foot pedals, mirrors, or human drivers to be tested on the roads beginning next year. There is a 15-day public comment period underway, and then final rules will be submitted to the state government, which will begin enforcing them sometime in the middle of 2018. California is a hotbed for autonomous vehicle testing, so changes made to the state's rules governing these tests are followed closely by companies like Google and Uber. In case you're wondering, if you don't live in the United States or anywhere near California, because California is such a large state and has such a large economy all its own, many of the things that happen in California just are automatically adopted across the rest of the country. So that's one of the reasons that California is a choice location for this. Also, I think California is known for having very strict safety regulations on a lot of different things. So I think if they can pull this off in California, it'll work anywhere. So if you live in California or you're traveling there sometime next year, keep your eyes on the road for a car driving itself around. There will be quite a few of them out there. Staying in the realm of autonomous vehicles, a autonomous train has completed its first journey across the Australian outback. And the mining company Rio Tinto has been working on this project since 2012, and now it has just completed a journey entirely autonomously without any train operator or conductor on board. This trip covered 62 miles in a stretch of desert between Wombat Junction and the town of Paraburdo. Love those names. And Rio Tinto also has a number of autonomous trucks at its mining sites. So this is pretty much anywhere there's a vehicle, there's somebody trying to make it drive itself. Now, this project took a while, 5 years, to go into this phase of full rollout testing because of a number of software glitches. But this successful test puts them back on track to doing long haul and heavy hauling with autonomous trains. And if that wasn't enough automation for you this week, I also have news about a farm in the United Kingdom that was run for a season entirely using automation. A farm in the United Kingdom is the first in the world to successfully plant, tend, and harvest a crop without a single person ever setting foot in the field, according to researchers and developers involved in the project. Quote, CNN article. It's appeared in many different places, but I just grabbed the CNN one here. From sowing the seeds to picking the grain, human workers were replaced with automated machines operated from a control room. The project, called Hands-Free Hectare, that's hectare as in the unit of measurement for measuring an area, something like an acre, Hectare, not Hector, like Hector Berlioz. Inside music joke for you folks. That was completed last month with a yield of 4.5 tons of barley. So according to the folks running this project, one of the main drivers of using automation in farming is rising cost of labor. If you can get a robot to do something endlessly and not pay a person, assuming the robot lasts long enough, that's a better investment for the farm in the long run. But there are still some limitations to be considered. Fresh fruits and vegetables are more delicate, so it could be much more difficult to harvest those than the grains. So you might not see robots everywhere, but in a lot of places. Also, there are some social and cultural implications with this. For example, in the article, they mentioned Japan might need agricultural automation because of a shortage of labor. However, in a place like India, widespread automation might mean unemployment for millions of people. So that's always a consideration that I try to talk about on the show, and I try to think about, and I hope you do too. All this wowie-zowie technology is great, but there is always a social effect on this, on our society, good, bad, or otherwise. That is to be determined by our collective thought process, but it's something that should always be considered. At any rate, lots of automation in the news these last couple of weeks. In some other farming-related news this week, you may be aware that sometime recently the United Nations classified glyphosate, commonly known as Roundup, as a potential carcinogen, and lots of people freaked out because people freak out about farm technology and farm science because they don't understand it. Glyphosate is very, very useful, and a lot of farmers use it because it's essential. It works really well. Organic farmers use pesticides. They use things like copper sulfate, and they use it at a much higher rate than farmers who use Roundup. But that aside, this carcinogenic designation is a bit sketchy. People freaked out about it, even though alcohol and caffeine are also in the same classification. But there are some other things coming out, and this gets to the core of how our culture treats science and how we understand science and how it's done, how the process works, who's doing it, who's checking it, and how important all that is to gather that information and to really not have an agenda. And if you think scientists have an agenda, you're probably wrong if they are doing legitimate good science. But as they say, follow the money, and sometimes the kinds of people who like to say follow the money, usually need to be following their own money. Because that's where the really sketchy stuff ends up. Much like the vaccine debate and Andrew Wakefield's disgusting behavior at the beginning of the vaccine autism nonsense. The scientist who advised the United Nations to classify glyphosate as carcinogenic received $160,000 from law firms bringing claims by cancer victims against Monsanto. Yes, indeed, the scientist, quote unquote, who told the United Nations that glyphosate causes cancer or is likely to cause cancer, has been paid by people suing the people who make glyphosate, which this is exactly the Andrew Wakefield situation. There have also been some other recent things about this study. The study itself was flawed and things were left out, and it was basically just cherry-picked and polished and shaped just right to make the United Nations give it this classification so that a bunch of lawyers could sue and have class action lawsuits and stuff. I've even seen the commercials on TV for this, and it's crap. Things like this, these kinds of stories just about break my no swearing rule on the show because I'm trying to keep it clean for the kids. This is beep, 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 beep. This guy should lose whatever. If he has a license, he should lose it. And, the people who are all like, no GMOs, no Monsanto, down with it. And anybody who stands up and supports science is called a shill. Like, you're a shill, you get paid by blah, blah, blah. And none of these people do. I mean, seriously, every scientist I have ever read about or communicated with who's been accused of being paid by big whatever, none of them have been, except for, some minor travel expenses to do something or like that. And here's this guy, $160,000. He's the shill. Go after him. No, don't go after him. Be better than that. But, when this stuff comes up, there should be some kind of rule that just erases everything he offered the United Nations here, because this completely invalidates his neutrality. Science has to be neutral. And it's hard to do because we're human beings and we're not naturally neutral, but the process of science is. And it has to stay that way. And so when you hear something is this or that, don't freak out, for one thing. And when somebody says, follow the money, a lot of times you follow the money on their side too, and it goes to some big business. It goes to Andrew Wakefield or to this guy or, the people who hate anything that's not organic food are backed by companies who make organic food and make a whole lot of money selling it. All right, I'm going to take a breath now and move on to some other news. In medical news this week, a team has determined the first high-resolution structure of a dopamine receptor. Researchers at UC San Francisco, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Stanford University have made a major step forward in designing more powerful psychiatric drugs with fewer side effects. They determined or solved, in the terminology of structural biology, the crystal structure of a specific dopamine receptor called D4 at an incredibly high resolution. This is the highest for any dopamine, serotonin, or epinephrine receptor to date, allowing them to design a new compound that tightly binds only to D4 and to none of the other 320 receptors they tested. So basically, using their techniques of examining the D4 receptor, they have a better picture than they've ever had before of how it's shaped, and when you know that, you can make things that will bind to this and not to other things even better than you could before. The D4 receptor has been implicated in ADHD, cancer metastasis, addiction, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, Parkinson's disease, and depression, and some other things. And these dopamine receptors in general are extremely important in how our brain functions and understanding how we can better send chemicals to them, or even knowing how other chemicals bind to them, like opioids. It can open up a whole new field of treatment for problems related to the brain. So I have asked some of my guests recently. It's sort of become a question that I like to bring up. What species do you think would take over if humans were gone? I've mentioned this on the show before, that the octopus is my choice. They are smart, and they have the manual dexterity to manipulate the environment. But whales and dolphins are a popular choice among people I talk to. And for good reason. They are obviously very intelligent. And according to a major new study published in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, they have linked the large brain size of cetaceans to cetacean culture. And in many ways, whales and dolphins, porpoises, and other cetaceans have culture much in the same way that humans have culture. By some definitions, this is my own off the top of the head definition, culture is a way of transmitting information to other members of your group or to successive generations, non-biologically, that is, not through DNA. That is basically teaching, passing along information. And according to this new study, they've observed many traits similar to human culture, such as complex alliance relationships, that is, working together for mutual benefit, social transfer of hunting techniques, teaching how to hunt and using tools, cooperative hunting, complex vocalizations including regional group dialects used in talking to each other, vocal mimicry, and signature whistles unique to individuals, in other words, perhaps using name recognition. Interspecific cooperations with humans and other species, working with different species. You do have, dolphins. Sometimes you hear the unusual story of a dolphin saving a swimmer or something like that, or just being able to interact with another species, even though you don't speak directly the same language. Also, alloparenting, which is looking after children that aren't your own. That seems to be another level of understanding what's good for the group. And also a social play. So all these elements you find in human cultures, and they're observed in other animals. I'm sure some of these behaviors you could also probably find in some birds, in some primates, in elephants. But now this interesting, a very formal study now publishing this information about cetaceans. And now, it came from outer space. First item in space news this week, the Planets Foundation has just completed funding, initial funding for its Exolife Finder ELF telescope. This will be designed to be the world's first telescope capable of searching for life on exoplanets, as well as imaging oceans and continents directly. This will be capable of viewing exoplanets up to 24 light years away, detecting the energy signatures of life, and imaging oceans and continents. So far, we have only been able to estimate the likelihoods of oceans and continents' presence, which is still hypothetical. The first target after it's constructed will be Proxima b, an exoplanet in the Proxima Centauri system, discovered last year by the European Space Observatory. ELF isn't the first telescope this foundation has worked on. They have the Colossus telescope, set to be the world's largest optical and infrared telescope designed to detect extrasolar and extraterrestrial life. And they also have the Planets telescope, designed to study faint environments such as the atmospheres of bright exoplanets. So all these are kind of working on a variation on a theme, looking at atmospheric compositions, looking at other just types of markers that you would find, looking at certain wavelengths that might be indicative of life. This funding for this one has just closed, and it will be built in the Atacama Desert in Chile alongside Colossus. And the Planets telescope will be built on top of the Haleakala volcano in Maui, Hawaii. So this company, a couple of interesting things going on here. Whether they actually ever find anything or not is kind of beside the point. We have come to a point with our technology that we can look directly for continents and oceans, or we can look directly for the signs of life, not, individual creatures or anything like that, but like on Earth, if you examined Earth from a distance, you would see a lot of oxygen, and that is not normal. That is this much oxygen in an atmosphere, as far as we know, could probably only get here by a process of photosynthesis. So that's the kind of thing they'll be looking for. Another interesting thing about this is crowdfunded. This is funded by the public by their own free will. I kind of wish it didn't have to be. I wish every project could get all of its funding that it needed. But in this case, here's another great example of someone with a great idea and the technology to do it, pulling the funding together and getting it done. Other space-related news this week. If you are interested in Mars, there's always lots of interesting Mars stuff going on. You might be interested in the International Conference on Mars. The 9th International Conference on Mars has been scheduled for July 22nd through the 26th in Pasadena, California. I guess a lot. I've not been to one of these before, but a lot goes on. In addition to discussing science results from past and active robotic missions, telescopic studies, laboratory analyses of SNC meteorites, terrestrial analog studies, and numerical models, we anticipate new geophysical understanding gained from the InSight mission, as well as a review of objectives for several spacecraft scheduled for launch in 2020 from public, private, and international institutions. Lots of stuff going on at the conference, so if you are totally into Mars, you should totally go to this conference. I will have a link to a website where you can check out some information on this, and also please note, if you may have seen this pop up in news elsewhere as being from July 15th through the 19th, but it has been recently rescheduled for the 22nd through the 26th of 2019. So you got a few years to plan that out and get all your ducks in a row so you can all go to Mars. Continuing with the Mars theme for the last bit of space news this week. Some time ago, I didn't really cover it. I don't think I mentioned it much. I kind of fell off my list of things in the news that I don't keep up with. NASA recently let 6 people out of a bubble from an 8-month-long isolation mission to test human endurance for long-term space missions. This took place in Hawaii to sort of simulate Mars conditions, and if they left the compound, they had to wear the spacesuit and do the whole thing like they were on Mars. Now, that aside, what has also come up now, or perhaps doesn't come up often enough, is law in space. As we are approaching a time when we may have many different countries, many different companies operating in space and on the moon or on Mars, we need to really start considering space law. Now, there are a few rules and laws in place now, generally governing things like the space station. For the most part, something that you put in space remains the property of the government or the company that put it there. However, claims on celestial bodies are a different matter. Private companies don't currently have a legitimate claim to mine the moon. Like Elon Musk couldn't just send, the Tesla moon mining operation up there and start digging around. There's no law that allows that to happen, and there's even some laws that say you can't do that. Some of these rules fall under the purview of the United Nations. And what we also, some of it's like international waters, some of it's like Antarctica. It's a bit of a hodgepodge, and it's kind of worked so far because we really haven't done a whole lot out there. Another issue to consider further is that of property rights and crime. What if an accident happens in the future? You have China and the United States on Mars, and somebody does something, and there's international dust up over whose fault some accident is or something like that. Hopefully, when we go there as a united group, and that's less of an issue. With scientific missions, I suspect it will be less of an issue. But when we do get to the points, whether it's private companies going to asteroids or to Mars, or even if a private company wants to establish a colony or something, the issue of space law will really become much more important, come more to the forefront. And now, I think, is a good time to start thinking about it before it's a problem. So I'll link to this article here. You can kind of read over the general thoughts on current space law and what we might do in the future, and keep that in mind as these things progress forward. Again, this is another kind of societal, cultural thing. As our technology goes forward to send us to Mars, are we as a people ready to deal with that, with what that means? Not only in a cultural sense, as a people, as a species, as a planet, and also in a legal sense. We have laws for a reason, and we'll need to carry some form of that law off the planet with us. And there's your show for the week. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this blast of news has got you up to speed on some interesting things that are happening in the world and coming right around the corner in the near future for you. As always, you can stop by the website, panfuture.org. You can send me a message there. You can find the show notes, links to Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, all that stuff. Your support is greatly appreciated, as always. And if you can't chip in any money, totally understand. Please share it with your friends. Write a review on iTunes. That is always very helpful as well. And as always, I will talk to you again in the future.